Well, now that everybody's here, and we've been working on this program in the background, and we have a lot of things to cover in 1 hour, which I'm going to hope that we get a chance to do. But I want to welcome everybody to bwtech CyberTini. As we were saying, it's unfortunate that we can't all be together and to be sharing the CyberTini that we run down the ice luge and get a chance to catch up with everybody. But we're hoping that this is a good change of pace for what we've all been going through and having our lives virtually. So a little bit of background, as many of you know, the bwtech is the economic development and incubation arm of UMBC. And I want to just take a quick moment to thank our sponsors. UMBC, the university, is just an amazing university. It's an honors university in Maryland. And we have a center of academic excellence in cybersecurity, which Rick Forno will be talking about later. EAGB is the Economic Alliance of Greater Baltimore. Thank you very much for all of your support. The SYNC program with Northrop Grumman, which is a program that we run at bwtech, and we're grateful to the support from Northrop Grumman. Whiteford Taylor Preston is our law firm of record and is available to help all of our startups. And of course, we wouldn't be bwtech without the support of the Maryland Department of Commerce and Baltimore County. So thank you very much. So with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists. And I'm going to, like I said, we've got a lot to cover, and we will try to make this conversational. But there are a lot of topics that we wanted to talk about when we talk about the security of our election. So with us today, we have our technologist, Ron Gula of Gula Tech Adventures, Sarah Lenti, who's I guess we would say is our social side of things, social and political perspective. She is the executive director of the Lincoln Project. And Rick Forno will be playing the academic in today's panel. He is also a technologist and business person. He is the assistant director of the Cybersecurity Center at UMBC. So thank you all for joining us.
Glad to be here. Sorry we're not in person with alcohol.
Yeah.
But those at home, you can drink along.
Yeah, I have my seltzer right here.
I have Crystal Light, if anybody even remembers what that is.
Yeah. This
So
is water. I assure you it's water.
So for the first time in our nation's history, the security of our elections has never been more in the forefront. I'd like to take a moment with each of you to discuss the security of the election from your respective standpoints. And Ron, I'll start with you.
Oh, great. So pleasure to be here. Just for folks who don't know, we get to invest in cyber companies and nonprofits that help keep the country safe in cyberspace. One of the nonprofits we do is Defending Digital Campaigns, and another one's Voting Works. So both of these work at different ends of the election and trying to keep it secure. Most of the time at Defending Digital Campaigns, we're talking about the campaign process. So, Rick, Megan, if you guys were running for office, you're going to have a staff that can be attacked. It could be attacked by the opposing party. It could be attacked by media. It could be attacked by foreign nations. And if you're a great candidate and somebody found something bad on you early, they might get you out of the race. That's one way the election can be, modified. Voting Works, on the other hand, they actually do more open source voting by mail, voting by in person. There's a lot of issues with aged or older election systems out there, and that also can help. So that's what we've been focusing on.
Great. Sarah.
Yeah, well, we all know that the 2016 election cycle was game-changing with respect to the meddling that we saw from Russia on both sides. And this election's no different. We're cognizant of that. We're also, in terms of election security in the cyber world, we're looking at, the bots, it's just what we're seeing and what we're hearing continues to be unprecedented, and we'll get more into that, but this is a very disconcerting election cycle.
Great. Rick.
I agree with everything that's been said. This is a very disconcerting election cycle. from the academic side, what we're interested in and what we're working on are really two key areas. Firstly, looking at technologies that can help mitigate the issue of things like deep fakes and fake news and things that can be used to influence populations over social media or television or the internet. But we're also here to educate society, educate our students, educate the workforce, and work to educate the public on what it takes to run secure and trustworthy elections. And that's everything from talking about the technology and processes of voting itself to educating the public on the security concerns, the integrity concerns, so that those all around the country are able to run elections that are indeed trusted by their constituents.
So let's talk a moment about those foreign adversaries, if we will. The Director of National Intelligence met with Russia and told us they're not going to meddle. What do you take of that statement? I'll hit that back to Rick.
I think that's a nice statement. I'm sure that's what we would say if the roles were reversed. Not necessarily sure I believe it, but diplomacy is often the art of saying one thing and doing the opposite. So it's not surprising to see that, but I wouldn't take that statement with too much certainty or trust.
And we know that there's a narrative. We know that RT, you can make direct links from the stuff that RT is putting out to Fox News, and Stanford Observatory is doing some major work on this and looking at it from a nonpartisan perspective. But there are absolutely, to say they're not meddling is, I would say, bullshit.
Just from like a nation state point of view, one of the things I'm happy about is elections are now considered part of our critical infrastructure. It wasn't until just a couple of years ago that we had 16 critical, this is like water, power, telco, and whatnot. Now elections are part of that, which is good. There's focus from DHS, there's focus from law enforcement. That's a part of the public narrative, and this is good. The problem is, it's one thing to defend against water being turned off or poisoned. The problem is influencing an election. That's a very weird thing. It's not like they're trying to shut down the election. They're doing this small thing like moving people's minds in this one county. Very, very difficult to detect and stop.
So Sarah, how do you combat disinformation from your aspect?
Yes. So I just want to raise one quick thing. For what it's worth, a Cornell study recently found that Trump was the single largest driver of misinformation around the coronavirus, and that mentions of Trump accounted for 37.9% of the overall misinformation in conversation around COVID. Coronavirus and vote by mail are the two best examples of misinformation that we're seeing, and we're regularly countering this information in our ads and on our social media. And the way you asked about, how do we combat with content and with ads. And in terms of verifying our own sources, we verify all of our content using multiple credible news stories, and we rely on their fact checking and only use major news outlets that fact check thoroughly. If we can't find corroboration for a claim in multiple credible news sources, we don't use it. But literally, our job is to is to defeat Trump and Trumpism, and that is to combat all the lies that he's putting out there with respect to COVID, voting by mail, and all the other things that he does.
So Rick, are there companies that you know of that are in this space that you're working with?
I'm not working with any companies specifically right now, but you probably the biggest set of companies that comes to mind in dealing with this issue would be the social media companies, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. They're the ones that we're seeing even today are being attacked by from all sides for either facilitating the spread of misinformation and influence or blocking the spread of disinformation and influence. So right now, I think the focus is really on the social media companies, but looking longer term, I think you're going to see more companies that are either cybersecurity backed or AI backed that will start using various new technologies to help mitigate the spread of the earlier identification of misinformation and falsehoods online, and maybe get them blocked before they even get posted online. So I think we're in the early innings of what new companies and technologies will become available to help deal with this problem.
So when we talk about misinformation, it's still very, very subjective. It's not scientific. It's pretty easy to do a report and say something was said by a candidate and it was wrong, therefore it was misinformation. When was that found? When was that put out? Has it already gone out to hundreds of thousands of people? There's no science there. So there's a project called the Credibility Coalition that treats this type of disinformation act, like seeding the network, pushing the information out, weaponizing it. And in the same way that as cyber people talk about APT or zero-day malware, and different types of networks are very susceptible to these kind of things and others not so much. But there's not a whole lot of vendors in this space. There's not a lot of money to be made in detecting this stuff in real time.
Yeah, I was thinking, how do you financially incentivize a secure election?
Well, I think you don't look at it in the context of securing an election. I think you have to look at it as securing the information ecosystem over time, not just every 4 years or every 2 years, but every day, every hour from now until whenever. And that there may be a business opportunity in that, using that model. But Ron's right. Every 4 years, there's not going to be any companies making any money off of this.
But there was money being made off of breaking into Baltimore City, right? The municipalities, right? So, because they were all held hostage. Ron, can you talk about your work with defending digital campaigns?
Sure. So defending digital campaigns is more about somebody running for office, which is a little different than the city being done. But a lot of times organizations who don't invest in cyber hygiene and data care, if they don't take what they're working on seriously, they're going to be a victim. And they could be a victim of ransomware in this case. They could be made a political victim. You know, if you've got emails and things that you don't want, getting out to the New York Post, to to CNN, to anything like that, you've got to hide those things. So one of the big things we do with defending digital campaigns is educate the candidates and try to talk about basic cybersecurity things like two-factor authentication. We don't just say, do you have cybersecurity? We literally start off with, do you have a password manager? Do you have two-factor authentication? I don't want to throw shade on folks running for office, but most people who run for office are not technologists. And they are not putting those kind of things. And our feeling is if we can educate them before they get into office, then they're going to make better cyber policy decisions for all of us.
So Sarah, recently the heads of the FBI, the NSCS, CISA, and NSA issued a joint statement on election security. Given your work at the NSC years ago, mind you, I know. Can you talk about, is this type of statement typical?
No, this is not normal at all. It's very concerning. It's unprecedented, I'd say. It goes outside of all protocols to weigh in on election matters with respect to the agencies that you named. And we also need to think about what's driving this. When things percolate up from, the FBI, NSC, and CSC, CISA, even the NSC, it's bottom up from within the government. So if this is happening, they have to be seeing a lot of, I would assume, flashing red lights to make it so that all four of them would want to come together and issue the statement. Things percolate up. So again, they're seeing things, they must be seeing things that are extremely concerning for them to issue such a statement. And I'd also say that if they're making such a statement on election security, and I'm sorry for my computer, then in their minds, I would guess that they're worried about if there's election stress going on and there is, if we're in chaos electorally, this is an opening for countries like China to do what they might want to do with Taiwan, for Russia and Eastern Ukraine. So there are larger security issues around this. And I think that's what's behind a lot of this.
And so we talk about social media. How do we secure social accounts from harassment and disinformation, and how do we figure those problems out? Especially, we've touched on students, we've touched on social, we've touched on political. How do we look to try to work within our social media outlets to make them more secure, or make yourself more secure?
Who was that to?
I'll throw it to Ron since you're
there you go. There you go. So, the school systems are doing a decent job of teaching kids about, not to do cyberbullying, not to, put things online, but they're not doing a good job about teaching about disinformation or teaching the kids that they're in this sort of bargain when they use Gmail or Twitter or Facebook. They're using that for free, but they're giving up all their data. So the schools have not done a good job teaching kids maybe the same way that they teach about banks or how credit cards work or how home loans work, about how social media works, right? So because of that, you've got a population that's really, really open to disinformation. And whether you're, Republican or Democrat, a lot of that frames what you believe. And it's the, science and facts people can discount like really, really quickly because there's so much other information out there. Critical thinking, not taught as much as we should, but that's kind of where things are going.
I'm going to stay with you for a minute. Can you talk about DEF CON's voting village and the impact that may have had?
Yeah. So for anybody who's at home watching this, and I guess that's everybody, when you walk into the voting booth and you touch a machine, a dial machine, different things like that, it's a computer at the end of the day. And maybe that computer is 15 years old and, it might have vulnerabilities. And maybe those vulnerabilities are literally things that somebody who's in the back office there, taking the chips out, counting the votes, could use to manipulate those things. There have been some studies about those things. Now, a lot of these attacks and these attack vectors, which is a term for all the different ways you might be able to break into something, they require some collusion, they require some stuff, but they're real things. If you bribe a few people out of voting registration, you might be able to literally flip some votes. And that's what the DEF CON Hacker Village kind of showed, that a lot of these machines still had vulnerabilities that were easily exploitable and could be used to modify election results.
So if you were to design the perfect system, voting system, what would that look like?
So I'm going to go on a limb here and I'm going to say the cybersecurity industry is very against doing it electronically, but they're very pro doing it by mail and because there's a physical record of it. But I would tell you is, I don't care what system it is. I think if you can do it by mail, you can do it electronically, but you do need a paper trail. I should be able to cast a vote. I should be able to print out like a QRC of my vote. And then at some point later in the future, I should be able to go and say, who did I vote for? How did you count me? Is it all good? If I can get a COVID test like that, I should be able to cast a vote, for whatever, a small schools board or the president of the United States. So I kind of disagree a little bit with the cyber industry when they said, we don't know how to build such a secure system. I think it's very doable.
Rick, you want to weigh in here?
Yeah, making this problem even worse in designing a robust system is the nature of American elections. It's not a federal process. We have 50 states and territories. Each one has their own way of running elections. They're all using different processes, different technologies. Some are still fully paper-based. So it's very difficult to develop a standard and have that gain traction given the federated nature of America's electoral process. Ron's exactly right. I also support the idea of a paper trail in some way, shape, or form. But just the very structure of how our republic is set up makes addressing some of these concerns a little more challenging, particularly when even asking questions about cybersecurity and the integrity of voting and elections in and of itself, asking that question is deemed a partisan attack. And that to me is very disturbing, because if we can't get above the political rhetoric and to address these problems, the situation is never going to improve. But unfortunately, asking questions can be seen as a partisan attack and make an already challenging situation even more challenging.
How do you answer that, Sarah? Oh, you're muted.
Can you repeat the end of that question so I can make sure I'm answering correctly? What was
how would you respond?
So the question was really, it's a partisan issue. It's become a partisan issue whether or not the election is secure, and if you should be voting through the mail or in person or whatnot. And how do we kind of bring that back around so it's not a partisan issue? It should just be a national issue.
It should be a national issue. Voting shouldn't be partisan. And I mean, it has become super partisan, but I'm not sure how to answer the question, but everyone just needs to vote is the bottom line.
Yeah. Sorry, we kind of cut you off guard there for a second. So while we have you, let's talk about voter suppression and how that has impacted this election. And, you know, even so much as to say that people are going to be watching at the polls.
Yep.
How does that?
Yep. So I'd love to give some background. On Wednesday, we announced our partnership with a group called CSA 2020. And for background, CSA 2020 came out of Democracy Labs. So they've launched this initiative called See Something, Say Something 2020. It's a platform that's equivalent to WASI, like for driving and for your directions and cars, but it's for voters to report instances of voter suppression in real time. They are offering, so basically the Lincoln Project, we're using their system and we have access to the back end of their system. So submissions are manually, so people submit anything they see voter suppression wise anywhere. And then they're screened by a team of volunteers, and then they're shared through a real-time dashboard and alerts to the media, various tech partners and influencers. And so the Lincoln Project's role is to basically shine a light around these activities and with the hopes of it leading to some remedy and creating a deterrence. So when someone uses the hashtag CSAY 2020, Democracy Labs has a coordinates and timestamp of when and where it was posted online. It can verify its legitimacy. And then we promote and direct voters and supporters to Democracy Lab's submission page in addition, where they can upload their photos, their videos, locations, coordinates, description of what they see. Ultimately, this platform will allow us to track and record any instances of voter suppression, shine a light on it, and maybe even make it relevant in any post-November 3rd litigation. So that's, I know various groups are working on voter suppression, but that's how we're doing it specifically at the Lincoln Project. And I would go ahead and check out Democracy Labs and their Say Something initiative if you're interested.
Great. Okay. So let's talk about students for a moment, right? So because of all of this, Rick, have you been seeing an uptick in more students being interested in cybersecurity and people from various backgrounds coming to your programs?
Well, certainly in a normal year, I'd say yes. COVID, everything is sort of, up in the air and crazy, but there is sustained interest. I mean, cybersecurity is not going to go away as a need in society. There are students that are interested in election-related matters, either on the technical side or on the policy side. And I think it's important because we have to, cybersecurity no longer is just this geeky technical domain with people like Ron and I in a basement somewhere doing all this keyboard magic. You have cybersecurity professionals and academics talking about election integrity and contact tracing with regards to COVID. So we've branched out because cyber touches every aspect of society. With regards to elections, absolutely students are interested in this. They hear a lot of these terms and they want to know, how can I apply cybersecurity concepts to the election process?
So Sarah, I'll jump to you on this also from a political strategy standpoint. Are you seeing the opposite happen, where you're seeing more computer science and more science majors coming into your
our world? Yes and no. I think probably not as much as you would suspect. I think a lot of campaigns rely on contractors to kind of help. In terms of our campaign, again, we're not the Biden campaign, we're a super PAC, but we do have a very robust digital team who are more than just techies. I mean, they understand tech, they understand how to secure. We all have all of us have two verification, I don't even know the term for it, but they understand not only the security around what we're doing, but they understand how to win national races. But in elections right now, I think it's more diverse than you'd think. We, at least from our perspective, our team, we have 8 seasoned political strategists that have no idea with respect to tech, truly. And then we've got, video editors, we have statisticians, we have former Intel operatives working with us to look at this. So it's more of an Intel perspective as opposed to a tech. And then again, we have our digital team, we have social media people that are focused on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, all that. And then you have a bunch of generalists. So it's not as tech heavy, I'd say, as one would suspect, but that will probably change in cycles to come.
If I can jump in on that again, Ron touched on this before. We talk about election security and election integrity. I tend to use the phrase election integrity because when we refer to security, it kind of implies we're looking only at protecting against hackers and physical security of a polling place. But election integrity takes a much broader and more holistic, a more interdisciplinary approach. It's including the things that Sarah was talking about. You bring in experts from psychology and sociology, education. Ron mentioned earlier, schools are teaching some things about media literacy, but they're not going far enough. We're teaching more computer science and coding than we are civics. And one of my greatest fears in this election cycle, and certainly, at least for the next several, is we need a Manhattan Project-like effort to create an informed electorate that understands the political process from a very young age so that they are less likely to be swayed by foreign or domestic influence that tries to claim false facts or misleading facts about what's at stake or how the voting process works. You should not be an adult and not know about the Electoral College. I mean, you should know about that at a very young age in civics classes. So just like I come from the humanities, my background is not in computer science. So I look at things a little differently than a technologist. The technology is important and we have a lot of technical issues that we have to address. But I think the more insidious and challenging aspect is how do we educate society over the long term on things like basic cybersecurity, digital, cyber hygiene, media literacy, to be able to differentiate fake news from legitimate news and do source verification on things that they're sent online. Because until we can do that, the influence threat is always going to be here.
One of the great things our kids are playing right now is this game called Among Us, where you basically pretend to be like a mutant space alien, but you have to go face to face almost and lie to them and say that you didn't do it. And this is one of the most popular games the kids are playing right now. And I'm just like, this is a great way to teach kids about disinformation and even more tactical things like being subjected to phishing email attacks. We would never teach something like that in the school system, but the reality is for modern life, you have to live with something like that.
I can just tell you, in my household, I would lose that game every single time. My kids would have me. So, okay, so I just have one more question, and then we're going to open it up to the chat. So, you guys are all leaders in your fields. Do you feel like you have a responsibility to, take a stand, to be involved in this? I know you came here today, but I just wanted to say, like, from your perspective, how should others get involved and do things that, secure our election, make sure that our elections have integrity? Do you think we need to set the bar higher? How do we do this?
I'll jump into that. So Rick's point about like not an adult not knowing how the Electoral College works it's inexcusable today. I mean, this is a big issue that the country is going to be facing here, I think. But for the most part, is getting involved. A lot of people don't feel invited. Some people, they wear the flag, they wear their party's hat, they go to the meetings, and that's great. But it creates sort of this outside looking in. And coming from upstate New York, I always looked at Albany, the capital of New York, as something far away, and even DC, this thing even farther. And now, just living outside, I get to do dinners, I get to meet with folks because cyber is something people want to talk about. And I tell everybody, look, it doesn't matter where you're at. So first of all, if you're in cyber, you can volunteer. Every campaign needs some cyber help. You could volunteer at the polls. I mean, we have a lot of time right now with us working at home. We need help with the polling systems, and not the polling systems, the election systems. So that's great ways to get involved. And then for kids, go in, if you're in cyber, volunteer to go into a classroom and give them your view on what you do for a daily job, because we do a horrible job of, teaching kids to go into cyber. they have coaches, they have teachers, they have scientists. They don't have like great IT people that inspires them to get into this field. So we need to go in there and be those examples so they can come into our industry and help, protect elections.
And I'll just say from our perspective, we're trying to get a handle on what we can do to change the course of what we see happening in this cycle. And we're looking at some projects right now that would get rolled out after this election cycle on innovative solutions with respect to Americans taking the battle to Russia, to the bots that we're seeing, to all of this. So for us, this is a project that's going to be long term and one that we're looking at closely right now.
I was wondering if you guys were going to essentially work yourselves out of a job.
We're gonna.
So you're not.
Right.
I'll jump on again to what Ron said. It's very encouraging this cycle to see the number of young people that are volunteering at polling places, at least where I live. My neighbors are election judges, and I made a comment several weeks ago, well, I'd be happy to stand for to volunteer. They said, you're too late. They closed the sign-up sheet back in November, December, because they had so many people looking to help and replace the senior citizens who normally staff these polling places, who are the most at risk to COVID. And so they told me a lot of young adults, teenagers, early 20-somethings were getting involved, which I thought was great, and it was encouraging to see that. But Ron's points about volunteering, getting involved, is important. Doing something that's meaningful, sharing your expertise, your experience, whatever your age level is important. You can wear the flags and show the symbolism. That only goes so far. And if anything, that actually contributes to the influence noise that we're also dealing with during these election cycles. So, take the time to do something tangible and meaningful in your local community to help the process move along, and do it from a rational and an informed perspective, and not just because some talking head told you to.
Right. And Sarah, you had mentioned the project that you guys are working on. We could probably put that in the chat also.
Sure. Yep. I will do that.
So, well, thank you. I think we've got some questions from the audience. Let's see, from Greg Simmons. So many young people are mission driven in a way that might be considered different than other generations. Is this issue, election integrity and civic literacy, a way to increase the participation of women and other underrepresented groups in cyber and related domains?
Absolutely. I don't see any reason why women and underrepresented groups shouldn't be involved more in every domain, to be honest. But absolutely. And there are demographics. I mean, I don't have the data, but when you look at how politicians and campaigns micro-target voters based on demographics, including race, ethnicity, income level, things like that. Yes, we need to get people from all different demographics involved and get them up to speed and informed to become active, informed participants in our society, particularly during our voting process.
One thing to note, as a state employee, we have the option of working as a electoral judge. And again, I was too late, but I hadn't really thought of it until a couple months ago. I will be right there when it opens again for the next election.
I want to jump on the comment about how do we get more folks into cyber. We really market cybersecurity really poorly. It does not appeal to folks who are not in cyber. Nobody outside of cybersecurity knows what cyber hygiene is. And it's very intimidating. So if you're a woman, if you're African-American, you're looking at trying to hang out with a bunch of successful, very accomplished sort of white males, you not only have to get over that, you have to become an expert in cybersecurity before you can even kind of, be on par with them. So we need to kind of broaden what it means to be in cyber. And I like to call this data care. If you were going to go into healthcare, you don't have to be a brain surgeon to take blood or to put a Band-Aid on or to be an ambulance worker, right? It takes training, not as much as a brain surgeon. But cybersecurity, we really seem to want to make everybody in cybersecurity an expert in every field. If you're doing incident response, you're supposed to know about compliance. If you're doing malware analysis, you're supposed to know about PCI security. we don't need to be like that. We could be much more inclusive and have a much clearer path of how to enter this career field.
I would also add, I'd be remiss being a UMBC faculty member if I didn't say that UMBC has taken several steps over the years to foster greater diversity and inclusion in STEM, and certainly within cybersecurity. Our Northrop Grumman Cyber Scholars Program for undergraduate students pursuing cybersecurity related degrees is well over 50, 60, maybe even now 70% diverse, underrepresented groups. And that's impressive. There's an impressive story there, and they then take their experiences working to create inclusion within their community out with them into the workforce and their local communities, which makes a difference. So that's just one example of how UMBC definitely is committed to inclusion and diversity in all fields, but certainly within fields like, as Ron rightly says, are traditionally very white male dominated, like cybersecurity.
So Sarah, I'm going to lob one over to you. The Lincoln Project has been very involved in the dialogue. And as you move forward, how is your organizations and others like yours actually working to bridge both sides so that, you know, as Rick said, we are having more dialogue, we're having more conversation moving forward?
So we're a 527, we're a super PAC. And when we set out to do this, we didn't think we'd raise $1 million, right? So in all humbleness, we've blown up and weren't expecting to have the impact that we're having on this election. Now that we do, we're trying to explore now what we do with that moving forward to make sure that we're participating in the best way possible. But this is all a work in progress. Right now, we are focused on ensuring that Trump is not reelected, and we're doing all we can in the next 19 days. And, you know, and then we're a content machine first, but, you know, we're partnering with the groups that we can to call out this oppression. But we're a work in progress. So stay tuned is what I'd say.
We are grateful that you're taking an hour out of your last 19 days
okay.
to come and talk with us. So one question that was posted in the chat earlier is from Stacy Locke. If she's curious if the U.S. is still working on campaigns to change the thinking in different countries. Are we doing the same thing abroad that's happening here?
Absolutely.
Ron, you might know that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's two organizations, DNI and the International Republican Institute. You know, and you might think that's Democrat and Republican, and it is, but they're really trying to bring democracy to a lot of places that don't have it. And I'm sure our State Department and CIA are doing a lot of other things besides that.
Okay. I'm looking through the chat. So a question from Nick's issue. While the focus of this webinar has been on US elections, how are we seeing threats to election integrity in other nations? And how can we apply insights to our approach to US elections? Are we seeing this happen elsewhere? Are we learning anything that we should be incorporating into our systems?
I think we went and observed elections in Eastern Europe, France, and England. When I say we, I think you have FBI, you've got different folks from DHS who've gone over and tried to see from the ground, you know, what they could learn. You know, they were interfered, just like probably here.
From Keith Mosdale, are there any positive aspects to voting interference risks? For example, could it be said that our federal system protects us by not offering one single system for voting? In other words, true interference with the act of voting would require interference in 50+ systems, right? I'm hearing his voice in my head as I read that out loud.
Yeah, I tried to type an answer to that. So, you know, I'm not here to say that I've got the right solution, but I'm here to say as the cyber industry, if the best we can come up with is paper ballots, then we should go home. Because now we haven't solved phishing, we haven't solved electronic voting, but we can give you Netflix and we can let you order stuff from Amazon. I gotta believe there's a way to do this. Now, it might require a national ID system. It might require like the equivalent of the US Postal Service of an internet or email communication system. There's thousands of issues with these things. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying as a society, I would want that.
But as I said, unfortunately, we're trapped in this position where you know, the Constitution reserves all powers, you know, not federalized back to the states. So if you have Homeland Security, and they've tried to come out to the states over the years to offer advice, support, technology, consulting, whatever, and many states said they refused, saying, how dare you infringe on our states' rights? So there are some fundamental things that we would need to overcome, like, dare I say, amending the Constitution to allow this sort of thing to happen, short of everybody agreeing and saying this is a good idea.
Well, Rick, to jump on that, if you look at states like Colorado and oh my gosh, who's the other one that's had mail-in for a long time? Like
Utah.
Oregon, right? They've been doing mail-in voting forever. Right? They got it down. They know how to do it. They know how it's cheated. They know those things, right? You look at Florida and Texas, they've had a lot of out-of-state, ballots for the folks, right? They know how to do it, right? But for people like Pennsylvania and Ohio, this is a new area. Why do I go through all that? Well, the first state that decides to do a cyber approach, they're probably going to get laughed at and jeered at until they figure it out. And once they figure it out and they realize it's a cost saving and it can be done and there are controls, I think if you can do online gambling, you can just be able to vote electronically.
And there's electronic voting done overseas. And there are countries in Europe that do electronic voting. And they, to my knowledge, have not had any significant problems. So if it can be done, it's just can it be done here?
Yeah.
Another question posed here is from Kevin Glover. Everyone I know craves a reliable, unbiased, fact-based source of news. Is there any hope? Could tech, AI, something like that help?
If you want one set of news, move to China or move to Russia. When you have free speech, this is what you get. I mean, you get debate and discourse, and I'm happy with the debate and discourse. Outside influences are going to use that against us. So we need to teach people to understand that not everybody's facts are facts.
There are several channels to pick from. Television, you could, if you want screaming and shouting, there are cable networks for that, and they cater to that. If you want quiet, resourceful, respectful discussion, there are television networks that offer that type of analysis too. The same thing with online sources and newspapers. A lot of it just comes down to what are you looking for as a citizen for your information. One of the things that many of my friends as well as I do is we'll read stuff from various sources. You may be a bleeding liberal, but yet they'll read the Wall Street Journal. They'll read through Fox News. They want to broaden their perception to know what the other side is saying. And that's important to break through that echo chamber. If all you do is park yourself in the Fox News camp or the MSNBC camp, you're only getting what's in that echo chamber. And that makes a lot of the issues we're talking about today that much more difficult to resolve.
I have a question that actually, as I filled out my ballot and dropped it in the box by Towson University, as a matter of fact, it had said if your ballot was asked to provide ID, please do so. How is that? Why do I not have to provide my identification, but somebody else does? Does anybody know the answer to that?
So I don't have firsthand knowledge of that, but I mean, I saw that. We voted recently as well by mail, and my guess is that for some people who've recently moved, or some people who maybe have, don't have an ID, maybe they're a felon. I don't know. There's probably some use cases where they need to verify who that person is. I haven't seen that in other states, to tell you the truth.
Sarah Woods just answered my question because your ballot already had your ID printed. Okay. Any advice for seniors who are looking to vote? How do we help them navigate through all of the information that they're getting? And I've what Rick was just saying of going through the many different types of information out there. I've had these conversations with my elder parents and aunts and uncles, trying to actually go into the conversation, seeing all sides and having a lively discussion, to say the least, but coming out, still family and friends and whatnot. So I feel like you have to break through the noise. How are you guys dealing with seniors? And Sarah, this might be something that you guys are dealing with more than Rick and Ron.
I'm unmuting
Go ahead,
myself.
Sarah.
So
Yeah.
one thing that we're doing is we're pushing people to go to vote.org to look at how to vote, the different ways to vote. But everyone, if citizens are confused, every state has a Secretary of State's office, which is, focused on just on these issues. So every state is different. So information is key. So look at your Secretary of State's website, call, look at vote.org. There are lots of resources out there that can explain the different ways that you can vote, voting by mail, all of that. And the sooner the better is what we're telling people.
I would tell, go ahead, Rick. No, if you have an elderly person a relative who's like in a home, I would tell them to visually see it dropped into the post office or give it to somebody that they trust to drop it off. I think we're just going to see too much stuff in the news about people who lost a ballot or, kind of accidentally, they might be pro-Biden, they might be pro-Trump, they might just not like your grandfather who's in a home and not deliver that thing. So they should give it to somebody. It's important enough. They got to give it to somebody they trust to get it in.
I agree with what Ron said. And I think to your point, Megan, the question that maybe wasn't fully asked was, how do we have the talk with seniors about the information that they're receiving going into the election? They're getting maybe from being parked in front of a television all day. I think really the first thing is to be respectful. And it's going to be a very tough conversation. Obviously, there are very deep-seated views. Particularly, I think it's the older we get more set in our perspectives. But above all, I think first and foremost, be respectful, keep it as cordial and civil as you can. Don't just condemn a person's view because it's not your view. Try to understand, show some empathy, and maybe come to some meeting of the minds that works. You may not be able to change their mind, but at least you're not making the problem worse and further reinforcing a view that you don't necessarily agree with.
So I'm very cognizant of the time, and I greatly appreciate you all being here. I'm gonna kind of throw a big question out there. How do we accept the results? How are we going to do that?
Well, this could be a landslide. So we're seeing scenarios where Biden could win and win decisively. If that happens, that's great. There is also the alternative where we're hearing that there could be massive electoral fraud, and this could go on and on and on. And we're hearing scary things about, Trump telling supporters, the 3%ers, there's a whole list of them, the Boogaloo Boys, all of them, to go arm the streets. If I would just say, people need to vote, and let's just hope. I'm going to cross fingers for a very decisive and landslide from the Biden campaign.
And to Sarah's point, historically, not these last few elections, but historically, American presidential elections have been landslides. So, a lot of these issues we have with the accuracies of voting, or we're going to count out of state votes and stuff, it didn't matter because, the candidate who won by such a large margin. It's only been the last few election cycles that, maybe a couple counties, could even influence that election. So we'll definitely see.
Yeah. Certainly everybody's on all sides going into the election night and the day after with some trepidation. I have colleagues at other universities that have actually canceled their classes that next day out of deference to their students, if not their own mental well-being. But Sarah's right. If there's a landslide and we're talking, 380, 400 electoral votes to 100 and whatever, that's pretty convincing. And even if there is a small percentage of fraud, it's not going to be enough to move the needle significantly to reverse that outcome. But my biggest worry is if it's that worst case scenario where it's very, very close within maybe 10 or 20 or 30 or a tie, then that's where things can get very dicey and prolonged, and there's a greater potential for unrest.
Way to go, Megan.
I was just going to say, does anybody else want to, add anything to the conversation? Is there something that we haven't touched on that you want to make sure that we're sharing?
I think everybody who's listening who hasn't voted should just say that they haven't voted yet. Shame them.
Flattening the curve. I think, Sarah, you mentioned that term. a perfect phrase. I know I've been using it for months too, not just for COVID, but given the amount of mail-in voting that we're seeing right now, the load on the Postal Service and then the load on the election offices is going to be phenomenal. So the sooner you can vote, if you haven't already, and get it in the system, it takes the load off of both the Postal Service and the election offices in delivering and processing your votes. If you wait until the last minute or even election day, it's going to be even busier than usual. So again, vote early if you can.
Great. Well, thank you all. This was very informative, very important. Greatly appreciate your time. Keep up the great work you're all doing. 19 days, Sarah.
19.
All right. Thank you all.
Yeah.
You're free to go if anybody would love to stick around, and I can open up the room to more chat. I've got, oh gosh.
A lot of questions. Very
yeah,
lively.
I can stick around for a few more minutes.
Yep,
okay.
same here.
Yeah, and actually, let me see if I can change this so that I can let people speak. Matthew Craig said, would a federal mandate to keep voting results and information for a certain amount of time to allow the auditing infringe on any state's rights?
I don't think so, because the states are the ones that control the voting and tabulation anyway. So a state could theoretically delay releasing their numbers until a date well into December.
Yeah, we did just lose our friend who was the political strategist, who may know that answer better than the rest of us. From Aaron Misanich, do you see any kind of cooperation among the parties to secure voting? Who could lead this initiative?
So Rick, what's the name of the group that oversees the election? It's like the election EAB. I forget the name of it, but they just got funded by Congress, which means it had to get past both the Republicans and the Democrats. Some insane amount of money, $600 million, $500 million. And that goes through DHS to the various states to do things like buy sims for the election campaign, to do things like buy, a training for those people. But state by state, it's so random. It's kind of hard to say, like one state's better than another, but they're all different.
Okay. Again, from Nick, back in the midterm elections, we saw NSA and Cyber Command take action by way of the Russia small group in the weeks leading up to the election. Do you see offensive measures to preempt nation state actors becoming a norm going forward?
I think that's already happening.
Yeah.
There was an article yesterday in the Times about Cyber Command taking preemptive measures to shut down influence and online attacks of various sorts related to the election. So I think that's been going on for a while.
Okay. Yeah, Stacy, I agree. I think gerrymandering and voting districts drawn so narrowly are a big part of why our country is so divided. That's a good point. It's a very tough one to answer. From Sync Day, the problem is that some states are trying to shorten the voting period and raise eligibility requirements. Yep. Voter suppression. Okay.
One of the problems that I've been thinking about, or items I've been thinking about over the past several weeks is, we talk about things like gerrymandering and, changing these eligibility requirements for voting and, all these ways of possibly disenfranchising people. And again, yes, it's an election integrity concern, and there are many things we could do to change the system. But unfortunately, one of the truisms of politics, and this is all political, is that the current system is what put the current politicians in power. And no politician is going to change that system that allows them to stay in power, short of some significant event. So I'm not sure that things like gerrymandering ever will completely go away.
Then, of course, you got this whole states' right issue, right? If we get 2/3 of all the state capitals together, we can actually make some changes to the Constitution along these lines.
Yeah.
But that's a whole, I think we need to be in person and have alcohol to have that discussion to actually get anywhere really, really constructively.
Yeah, when are we gonna have our next CyberTini and be able to get together? And I'm
The
constantly
after webinar will commence at 4:30 today.
Exactly. Well, thank you all. I really appreciate your time. This is really, really helpful. This is, again, the CyberTinis have changed. I feel like we're going to change them back. Having these discussions is incredibly important to, our companies at BWTech, to the students at UMBC. I hope that we get more involvement. I also wanted to do a shout out to CAMI, the Cybersecurity Association of Maryland. They have a volunteer or a program where they are at the cyber SWAT teams, where they have cybersecurity professionals that go in and help other companies. So that's something that you can look into. Well, with that, I greatly appreciate your time, and look forward to seeing you guys in person again soon.
Likewise.
Cheers.
All right.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much.